That deadly plane crash in San Francisco. We're learning much more from the pilots and crew about those terrifying moments just before and now right after the crash. ABC's David Curley is tracking the investigation. Good morning, David.
George, so many amazing stories of bravery and survival, but also some striking details about what the cockpit crew did and now the 911 calls.
There are people laying on the tarmac with critical injuries, head injuries. We're almost losing a woman here.
The NTSB says after hitting the seawall, losing its tail and spinning around at 100 miles an hour before coming to rest, the pilots told passengers to stay in their seats, no evacuation for a minute and a half.
The flight crew told the flight attendant not to initiate an evacuation. They were communicating with the tower about the emergency.
A flight attendant who spotted fire finally convinced the pilots to evacuate the plane.
I don't think they really understood how little of their airplane had arrived with them.
But only half of the 12 flight attendants were available. 3 who were sitting at the rear of the plane had already been ejected from the 777.
The immediate attention gets that they're alive and walking around.
And this morning we're learning more about the final seconds in the air, too, from the NTSB. The captain, being trained on how to land, told investigators just seconds before landing a flash of light temporarily blinded him. Was it a laser? The NTSB says it doesn't know. But in the last 2.5 minutes of flight, the pilots selected multiple autopilot modes for direction and power. It appears the pilots thought the engines were in cruise control mode, but may not have been, leaving the plane without enough momentum to get to the runway. Now, what about pilot fatigue? Well, both of these pilots were off the day before. They slept 8 hours the night before. They did take off and flew for a few hours, then had 5 hours off of rest before they returned to the cockpit for the last hour and a half of flight. So it doesn't appear that fatigue was an issue, George. It comes back to this mode of picking the autopilot, which mode they actually picked, and they may have picked one that did not give them that cruise control, and they may have expected it.
Okay, David, thanks very much. Let's get more on this now from ABC News aviation consultant Colonel Stephen Gannon. Let's pick up right there. Steve, what about these auto modes on the cruise control? What can you tell about what was going on there?
They selected lots of different modes, George, at the very end part of the flight, those last 2.5 minutes. What this would suggest is that either they were conflicting, that they were working over each other, or that maybe they didn't know exactly how to use those modes. Remember how new this pilot was in the left seat, and it was a totally different airplane. He'd switched from an Airbus airplane to a Boeing airplane. Everything's mechanized differently, the software is different, so maybe there was some question in his mind in what he was selecting.
So it could be as simple as flipping the wrong switch. And now we're hearing also about this flash of light that one of the pilots may have seen at about 500 feet.
George, this one's a bit tough to swallow. This may come under the subject of the dog ate his homework. I can't imagine what would have gotten into the cockpit and seen by only one person. If it did happen, why didn't he say something to his fellow pilots? Why didn't he turn over the controls to his fellow pilots? This one's a bit difficult.
So that doesn't make any sense, even though we have heard these reports in the past about people flashing lasers at planes. And then finally, and this was a surprise as well, the pilots keeping everyone, preventing them from evacuating for a full minute and a half after hitting the ground.
Yes, the pilots have to be the ones who say it's time to evacuate because they need to assess the situation and say, oh, there is fire, there's no fire, go out the left side, go out the right side. But in this case, it's hard to understand why it was 90 seconds. Thank goodness one of the stewardesses took the initiative to pull the slides after seeing fire on one side. You know, when an aircraft is certified, the FAA does a test where they put everybody in the cabin and they say, ready, set, go. And they have 90 seconds to get everybody out of that airplane, or they say this airplane's not safe. And they have to do it over and over again until they can do it in 90 seconds. In this case, they waited 90 seconds, and then they started the evacuation. So thank goodness that fire was very slow in starting, and people had time to get out of the airplane.
A lot of luck there at the end. Okay, Stephen, thanks very much.